life is going to throw you a bunch of things, but you're just going to have to learn how to duck and cover and take care of business and prioritize the things that you need to and just focus.
Welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast, where we explore the hidden side of modern work. My name is Martin McGovern, founder and lead coach of Career Therapy, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. In this episode, I want to welcome Tina Tran to the podcast. Tina is a director of business development at Microsoft, a former Facebooker, a board director and startup advisor, a presidential leadership scholar, public speaker, and even a career coach. In our conversation, we talk about building confidence in the job search, finding belonging in your career, and Tina shares a fascinating story about how she met former presidents Clinton and Bush, and how she ended up being featured in George W. Bush's new book, Out of Many One: Portraits of America's Immigrants. Her journey is a truly amazing one, and there is so much we can learn from her optimistic, driven approach to building her career. So if you like this episode, I hope you'll check out Tina's work on LinkedIn and Instagram, subscribe to our show here, and leave a review, and share this conversation with a friend or colleague close to you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Tina. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's just super fun and just interesting to talk with you about your career, because it has been such an interesting career. So I'd love to just maybe, lay the groundwork for us. How did your career begin, and what are you up to today?
My career began when I was a senior at UCLA. I decided I wanted to do management consulting. And I frankly didn't know what a management consultant was, but it was what everybody was doing and was the kind of most interesting job it seemed out there. And because I didn't really have a network in college other than my friends who didn't have any idea what they wanted to do either, I really kind of leaned on visiting the Career Center. And I saw that there was an event, management consulting night. I came across that and I attended, and I got a sense for what it is they do. And I took the card of it was a panel, and I took the card of the person that I thought was most engaging and interesting. And I didn't follow up with him then because there were so many people, rushing him at the stage because other people thought the same. But, I reached out to him afterwards. I ended up actually interviewing with his company and did very badly on the interview and absolutely knew I blew it. And I, reached out to them for really sincere feedback because I basically said, at some point I'd love to have a job, even if I totally understand that it might not be with you. And the people I interviewed with, two guys, just wouldn't play ball. Like they're just completely uninterested in helping somebody that's like starting their career with some feedback. So I just reached out to him and said, "Hey, do you think you could like ask them to give me feedback? I don't really want you all to give me an offer. I just want sincere thoughts on how I could do better." And he reached out to them. They said, "No, we're not interested in talking to her." So he felt so
What?
bad that he got back to me and he said, "You know what? I feel really bad about this. Doesn't reflect well on us. Let me take you to lunch." And I think, from what I understand, UCLA was his alma mater, so there was a connection there for him, and that's probably why he was there that night. And he kind of became my unofficial mentor. He told me exactly what it is management consultants look for, what I should convey, and then it helped me to kind of like really retool my story, my resume, and I had to take a bunch of other steps outside of what I did with him. I had to do a lot of cold calling, cold emailing, and get in front of people even when they didn't think I should get in front of them. I mean, I'm first generation. I might not even be first generation. I came to the US when I was 4, so I think you have to be born here to be first generation. So when we didn't have money, so in the summers, like I would just work at jobs where I got paid, not like have internships that were hooked up, So I didn't really have the resume that they were looking for, but I had good grades because that's what I could control. And uh, I was cold calling companies in New York. I wanted to work in New York, and like being in LA, it's really hard to get to New York. And this one woman said, "We can't interview you, but we'll let our LA office interview you. And if you pass them, you can come out." And this is the beginning of my career, in that like this happened where I showed up to go to look at the job board to see when my interview was, and I wasn't on the list. And I called her back and I said, "I'm not on the list." And she said, "Oh, it's a mistake. Let me fix that." I showed up at the interview and the guy said, "I took your resume out of the list and I'm really annoyed that you're sitting in front of me. I've been doing this a long time." I didn't realize that was what had happened. And so I said, "Well, we're here. I didn't realize that's what happened. Let's make the best of it." And at the end of the interview, it was his last of the day because I don't think he wanted to speak to me. he said, you're the most interesting person I've interviewed today. I'm going to send you on to New York. And because of him, I only got one offer. I took that offer and I got my start in New York. I was the first person the New York office had ever hired west of the Mississippi because they had their pick of Ivy League kids. And so to me, like perseverance, being resourceful, it wasn't just one person that helped me. It wasn't just John Anthony from Ernst and Young that helped me, but it was this woman that answered my call from Coopers and Lybrand. It was the guy that decided, yes, he'd give me a chance, even though he didn't really want to be in front of me. And it's just about putting your best foot forward and somehow like getting people on your side or being compelling enough to get them to want to talk to you and help you. Cause I didn't know any of these people, right? So it's a whole bunch of things together that makes your luck and allows you to be successful. And from there, I really felt like I could almost do anything because it worked for me, where I worked really hard and tried all these different avenues to get to a place. And I kept doing that throughout my career. So my career is kind of made up of exceptions because people are like, normally we don't do this, but okay,
What
we'll
do
do
you
it for you.
what do you think it was that had made him pull you out of that list? Was it the Ivy League bias? What do you think it was going through that person's mind?
I didn't have the right background in terms of the summer jobs I had. I think he was looking for somebody that already interned at one of the other consulting firms or at a big Fortune 500 company. And so it's hard to know what you're supposed to do if you're an immigrant and your parents haven't worked in the US before, right? And had to start all over again. And it's not like it's hard to find mentors when you're in high school, right? Because it's like you just have one another and you have your teachers who might know what it's like to be a teacher, but maybe not a management consultant, right? Other things. So it's just being resourceful and surrounding yourself with the right people. I had a very close friend then who told me I could do whatever it was I put my mind to. And he was incredibly smart and I saw that it worked for him. And he basically was like, you need to work really hard. You need to get good grades so that you'll pass kind of the minimum bar for submitting your resume. And he just kind of put the fire in me. So I'd say, surround yourself with people that put the fire in you and believe in you.
And that piece that you mentioned earlier around the grades, right? You're like, I don't have necessarily the background they're looking for, but I still have control. I can control my grades, right? And I think that that's one of the things that folks struggle with in the job search, especially with this question of experience or background and things like
Mm.
that. I work with folks who don't have college degrees. I work with folks who, have very unique backgrounds. And they get into the job search and it's so overwhelming because every single post says you have to have this many years experience and this kind of education and this kind of background. And the recruiters say, if you don't go to an Ivy League or if you don't have a big name company, we're not even going to look at you. And like the list goes on and on. And I know you and I have chatted offline about like, creating yourself in a way. It's like there's two topics I really want to dig into with you today. The first part is creating yourself, and like the phrase that we used was I think it was make it or don't fake it, make it. And then the other side is like, how does that fit in with community? How does that fit in with belonging? And I think that those two things playing together, it's the individual and working on yourself individually, but also the community and working on where are you, what community you're in. And so I'm curious, as you were looking at that sense of control, here's what I have control over. How has that changed throughout your career? I mean, grades obviously when you were younger, but what other things throughout your career have you sort of noticed like, well, I maybe don't have everything, but I can at least control these aspects?
You can Everybody has different skill sets. So I think if you read a rec and it says we want all of these things, it's really important for you to think about when they say that, what is it they're trying to convey that they want you to be able to show? So maybe you haven't worked in management consulting, or banking, which is for some reason a lot of people love. What are the skills that those people have that you can convey that you've done? So I would say, for example, how do you a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have any experience in this area of say video games, for example, and all these other people do." What is it that you bring that's unique that the people that might have video games background don't, that they wouldn't think about? So it's not about having people that all look the same. It's actually about diversity of talent and expertise that makes a team strong. Because otherwise, it's like if I already have one strong person in finance, I don't need another. I frankly need somebody in marketing that's strong, in social media that's strong, in strategy. And so it's really kind of identifying not what you don't have, but having confidence in what you do have and why that would help the company more than having the experience that everybody else has, right? So identify what is it about me that's unique. And frankly, you're going to have to work twice as hard as everybody else, and you're just going to have to be okay with that. And to really get the point across. And it's not just about telling people, it's about showing them. So, on your resume, make sure you're not just saying, I did this function. Great, you did the function. How do we know you did it well? Like, that's what I always think when I look at a resume, like, awesome. So how do I know you succeeded? Talk about what you did and how it impacted the company, how it impacted the customers, what the significance was of your role, what you did to change things up, what your results were. That speaks for itself, right? Not just, and frankly, putting something down that you did doesn't say that much other than that you did it. You have no sense of whether you were mediocre or good at it. So I'd say those things are really important when you feel like you might be lacking something, reposition that to yourself to think about what is it I do have that these people might not know that they needed, and do a little research on the company to maybe call something out about the company that they've either put in the press recently or has been a hot topic recently, and talk about how your experience is something that would be completely relevant to that. Make people know that this is about not you wanting a job, but you wanting to work there. So
Right.
it's really about going that extra mile, right? I'll give one example. I was applying for a job in Europe. It's my lifelong dream to work and live in Europe. Like this refugee comes to the US, is able to thrive, and it's like, well, what can I do next that would be like the most amazing thing? I just couldn't even imagine. And I didn't have any international experience. I didn't have any contacts abroad. So I just started looking at the job sites, as you do, and I started applying to all these jobs where I had one thing that was, of the 10 bullet points. And to myself, my mantra was like, it's not my job to weed myself out. That's somebody else's job. But what I did do was put a very tailored resume together for each position. I would look at the rec and I would make sure that my resume would address some of the things that they wanted within the first couple of bullets so they could see it's a match. And then I wrote a very tailored cover letter that basically talked about something the company did recently and how my experience was relevant. And I finally one day got an email back from this recruiter who said, well, you're not a good fit for this position that you applied for. But I have this other position that you seem like you'd be great for. And because of him, that he was just, the first step, I had a chance at this job that wasn't out there that I didn't know existed. And I found somebody that in my network that worked at the company. My boss had worked with somebody that worked at that company, and I said, "Hey, would you introduce me to this person?" He said, "Yes." I met the guy for breakfast, and he told me all about the company and what he'd been doing there for many years. And so he gave me the inside edge. All of a sudden, a company I didn't even know about really, as having I was getting the inside edge. So once I went and interviewed with the company, they sent me to Germany to interview with them. I was able to do much better in my interviews because I had this context, this like insider information. And it was weird. I hadn't met this person before other than the intro. And he said to me at some point once I got the offer, well, I still have a house in Germany that's really close to the office, and we're living here in the Valley. Would you like to live in our house and take care of it for us?
That's
So I
amazing.
got to live in his house, take care of his house room because he trusted me, and work at this company that so again, it's not about one thing we do, because the one thing I did was like reach out and be very thoughtful about the application process and not weed myself out. But then I reached out to my community and their community to see who could help me. And I think once people understand like who you are, why they should invest in you, your main community, then they're more willing to help you connect with other people. um, but I use this example similar to the last example because I want people to see that it's not about one thing you do, but it's about like the whole spectrum of things that you do to reach out, to strangers, to people in your network, to establish really good relationships so that people really want to invest in you and help you. Because people's time, everybody has very limited time. There has to be something unique about you that comes across that will help you connect with people, and that will help your career immensely.
And that's the thing that people struggle with, right? I'm doing an alumni panel this weekend, and for one of my clients, and all the questions we always reach out to students and we say, what questions do you have for the alumni? And all the questions are centered around, what is the one thing I need to do to get this job? Who's the one person you talk to, or what's the one thing that worked best, or like, what's that thing that got you good at networking? And I read through these questions and I'm always just like, none of it. Like, there is no one thing. It's like doing dozens and dozens and dozens of
Hmm.
things over time leads to good
Hmm.
outcomes, right? Like,
Yes.
someone could say, Martin, how do you get clients for your business? The podcast, I guess, but also social media, but also reaching out to people, but also the networking I've done for 12 years, 15 years. Like, it's it's every single thing all put together that leads to where we're trying to get. And I like what you're saying here, right? It also plays into this mindset that people have, which is, I just want to do my job and go home. And I can understand that mindset, like, rationally understand it. And I've even felt that way myself on certain days, right? But at a certain point, I'll just ask someone, I'll say, what value does your role bring to a company? And no one's able to articulate it. Like, what is the value that you bring to a company? And I love how you're phrasing this, because you're like, you really have to, show how your work fits within a team. You can't just say, I do development work and I just don't want anyone to bother me. I just want to be heads down doing development work. If you don't understand how that improves the website, or how that gets more clients, or whatever the thing might be. And so I'm curious, as you've been going through your career, what are the things that businesses care about? Because you're in such a unique, management kind of a role. What is it that companies care about? Obviously, revenue is the biggest one, but I'm curious if you have, like, maybe a more specific or more articulate way of phrasing that for folks, so they can start thinking more contextually about how their work fits in.
Sure. I think the last two companies I've been at, Microsoft and Facebook, really care about impact. And I kind of alluded to that when I talked about when you are writing up your resume, don't just write what you did, but write about why it mattered. And so, if for you, I think to do well in the professional world, it's really important to be aware of, like, what efforts am I working on? What impact is that to the company? And if you feel like the stuff that you're working on is low impact to the company, that's not great. And maybe that's an opportunity for you to talk to your manager and say, here are the things I'm working on. I really want to have more impact. Are there, I see an opportunity in this area and that area. So identify opportunities to have more of an impact. Suggest, see if people are open to having you work on those areas. Suggest ideas where your company and the role that you have, where you could have more impact, and make sure it aligns with what the company vision and company goals are. Right, like a lot of folks these days have OKRs, um, objectives, and key results where people are really saying these are the things we're trying to achieve. So make sure you understand how what you're doing maps back to what your company cares about, and that you're able to measure that impact. Something I ask people all the time when I work with them, and internal as well as external, is like, how are you measured? How is success measured for you? It's so helpful to understand how people are measured, so that you then can really understand how you can help them. And then if you understand how you can help them and they understand that you care, then all of a sudden it's a little bit more of a meaningful relationship, because you've kind of changed the conversation to, what can I do to help you? I'm trying to understand your goals better. People love that.
Absolutely. And I think it really does bring this idea of mindset to the forefront, right? I think a lot of times we can get really frustrated and really down during the job search, which is tough because we're trying to also portray a very positive side of ourselves, right? We really want to bring that energy, right? And, in our conversations before this podcast and on this podcast, I can tell you're an energetic, optimistic person, but everyone has tough times in their careers, right? And so I'm curious, how have you balanced what are maybe some times that you've struggled in your career and, had to find that had to push yourself a little harder to find that energy and bring that best self to the
Absolutely.
process?
I've been at a lot of startups. Before I was at Facebook and Microsoft, I was basically at startups. So probably even at 7 startups or something like that. And when you're at that many startups, you're taking a big chance. It's really risky. You're going to get laid off. The company's not, the company's going to close down. So I've been out of work a lot. And it's not a great feeling, especially when you're out of work during a recession, because like nobody is interested in hiring you. And there was one time where I loved this job. It was my first job in video games, and I was totally blindsided and I was laid off. And it was the beginning of the recession, but recessions are funny. You don't know it's a recession until later. It's like usually a year later,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, it's a recession now, right? And so, there's no like clear, like, oh, we're in a recession. You're just kind of like, oh, I got laid off and that really stinks. And then my fiance and I broke up, and then like I had moved in and now I didn't have a place to live, and my future in my mind of like this, endless happiness, blah, blah, blah. It was all just like blown to smithereens. So I'm looking for a job in the middle of a recession, which I'm not aware of. And I'm having to like show up and be energetic and be happy when I'm literally dying inside.
Oh my
There's like
goodness.
all the badness. Like, I moved into a random new apartment. Like I'm crying every day. Um, and you just have to like focus on the prize, like whatever it is that's going on in your personal life. Pick yourself up, know like what your goals are, know you'll get past it, and learn frankly how to compartmentalize and find healthy ways to have an outlet. So what for me, it's always been like working out, being active, having these healthy outlets so that you can focus on what you need to focus on and take care of business is super important. I also found myself uh, at the I had the unfortunate experience of being laid off of my job when I was like 4 months pregnant, because I told my CEO that I was pregnant, and after that he like stopped showing up for our one-on-ones and then laid me off. Such
That's
a bummer.
insane. That is
It's
so insane.
totally, things like these things happen. You just would never think they would happen to you. They happen. And you don't have complete control over your circumstances. So I had a choice to make. I was like, I can be really miserable and really resentful and like sue this company because it's so ridiculous. And it was just like blatant. Like, you would just have the emails that showed, well, you used to show up to all of our one-on-ones, and then I didn't hear from you for a month after I told you I was pregnant. Like, what happened? So rather than do that, I was just kind of like, well, I don't really want to focus on negativity. So I'm going to focus on what I can, which is I need to find a new job, and I need to do it before I'm really showing that I'm pregnant. So, because it's fine to be pregnant, but you probably don't want to lead with that.
Hmm.
Um, and as it turns out, I was reading Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book. And one of the main takeaways from that book was don't leave before you leave. So a lot of women will, like, if they're getting married, maybe took their foot off the pedal because they want to plan the wedding, or if you're pregnant or you think you want to even start a family, like if it's even an idea in your head, you start taking your foot off the pedal. She's like, don't do that. Just keep your foot on the pedal until you need to ease it. And so I was like, well, there's no more leaning in than being like 5 months pregnant and waddling around town and looking
Oh
for a
my
job.
goodness. Yeah.
So I reached out to my network, and I wore like dark clothing so I wasn't really showing. And I interviewed and I landed the job at Facebook. I think I got an offer in like month 6 of pregnancy. I started month 7, and then I worked for a month and gave birth. And I told them ahead of time, obviously, like as you know, you probably could tell I'm pregnant. And they were super supportive. That made me a much more loyal employee, as you can imagine. And then I actually had the opportunity to like tell Cheryl how her book impacted me and landed me at Facebook. It's just
Wow.
like full story. It was like the 5-year anniversary of the book. And so I just wrote her a note and told her. And so she was like, I'm really glad you're here with us. So those are the things that we can do. I mean, life is going to throw you a bunch of things, but you're just going to have to learn how to duck and cover and take care of business and prioritize the things that you need to, and just focus. So, and it'll all come together. Whatever's happening, it'll be much worse if you're not able to, you know, financially make sure you're secure,
Hmm.
or, that type of thing. And you're going to need something that's happy to celebrate, and being able to find the job that you like, that you love. That's a happy reason to celebrate.
And that's one of those things where I think so often, especially with, the way things are portrayed online, everyone is trying to find their quote unquote dream job, right? And they put a lot of pressure on themselves to find that one perfect company where they will belong forever. And I always try and dissuade people from thinking in that way because even if you find the dream company and the dream role, your boss might quit or your teammates might change, or like, even if you're in that role for 10 years, it won't be the same role for all 10 years. And so I'm curious, because you've had such a diverse background of roles and companies and opportunities come your way, some good, some bad, how do you find that sort of sense of belonging within each of these different environments? Because part of belonging is just kind of showing up and, hey, it all worked out, right? Like there's the happenstance belonging. But then there's times where we have to put in a little effort to feel like we belong in different places. So I'm kind of curious, what has that looked like in the different spaces that you've shown up in?
I think it's just having like a natural curiosity for other people and like what makes them tick. And then once you have a sense of that, like maybe you share some things in common that make you tick as well. I remembered in my first job in management consulting, I showed up in the San Francisco office. I transferred to San Francisco eventually so I could be closer to tech. And the head partner there was like super into Napa, and I didn't drink. I still don't. So I wasn't interested in wine, but I just Napa Valley is like the prettiest place ever. So he came in, and I said, "How was your weekend?" He told me about this wonderful B&B he went to, and I said, "Can you give me the name of the B&B? I'd love to go." And he did, and I went, and we started bonding over this fact that we just love to have beautiful, fun adventures, whether it was Napa or abroad or whatever. So now, fast forward however many years it's been, 20 plus years, and we're still friends. I was just on the phone with him last night, right? He
That's
bought it. He
awesome.
ended up buying a house in Napa. I've stayed at his house a bunch. And so it's really just asking people simple things like, how was your weekend? And how do you connect? And what do you have in common where something beautiful can kind of come out of that? And it's not being afraid to, it's definitely not like just kind of being quiet and waiting for people to talk to you. It's just try to be, and I know not everybody's outgoing. I'm lucky because I'm just like outgoing, and so I'm just out there. But try to be curious about people and get to know them, because that's how we connect, and that's how everyone feels a sense of belonging, is once we get to know one another and we have those points of similarities or connections, or just like you can really admire that somebody knows how to kite surf and can do a bunch of tricks, or runs crazy marathons without being somebody that does them yourself, right? So
Yeah.
there's opportunities to connect with people on things that you think are really cool that you might not do. um, so I think just being aware of like what makes people tick, so that there is some people, it's their alumni network, sometimes it's their kids, you don't know, right? But it's just finding those points of commonality, and understanding where people's joy comes from, and giving people a sense of who you are, like revealing of yourself, what things you care about. And that's how it starts.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think a lot of times people are primed to only be quote unquote professional in their conversations. They're like, if I'm not talking specifically about work, I'm not doing it right. And I always try and be like, hey, if you're networking with someone or if you're in an interview and you spend 15 minutes talking about some random stuff that you're both interested in, you're still winning. I had this one of my first interviews when I was in college for my first job. I had a broken thumb from skiing because I don't know how to ski well, and I tried to do a jump and it didn't go well. And the person I was interviewing with was like, "What happened to your hand?" Because I was so nervous, I tried to shake his hand with a broken hand. And I go, "Oh, I was skiing," and he just talked about skiing for like 15, 20 minutes, and I was like, "This is wonderful. You just take it away. I know very little about skiing clearly because I hurt my hand, but yeah, those kinds of things I think are really fun, like letting people geek out, letting people be themselves. Like if you want to belong, you have to make other people feel like they belong as well. And I think that that's sort of what you're talking about here. It's like that, bringing that curiosity to the table and allowing people to be themselves will give them the space to allow you to be yourself as well. And when it comes to curiosity and confidence, because I think one of the reasons why our curiosity shuts down is because we're nervous or we're anxious or we're overwhelmed and we just feel like we don't want to mess up, right? But you're someone who's able to go that extra step. Sending an email to Sheryl Sandberg is something that would typically put someone through a wall with anxiety, right? So what are your experiences with, going that extra step and, having these conversations, having these connections with larger than life public figures, because I think some people are too scared to reach out to the junior dev at a company, let alone someone with high status or prestige in that way. What's been your experience with that?
It's funny, I just think of people as people, and so I try not to treat them any differently, especially when people have made a difference in your life, like, why wouldn't you want to tell them about it, right? And they've impacted you in some way. Nobody's ever gonna be like, "Don't waste my time." They're gonna stop and say, "Tell me more."
How
You know
dare
what
you
I
say
mean?
thank you to me? How dare you?
Right. So I think it's just being sincere and knowing the person enough so that you have a sense of like what they might value, what might be interesting to them. And it's really important. I think, you touched on the interview process where you were talking with somebody for quite a while about something that had nothing to do with the actual interview. A big part of the interview is whether somebody wants to work with you and would like working with you and whether their team would like working with you. So if you're just going to be kind of buttoned up talking about what you can do, then you're just going to be like every other candidate who's sitting there buttoned up talking about what they can do. But if you can connect with them on a human to human scale, um, then they're like, okay, this person is capable and they're fun. And I think they would be a really good fit on the team because they're engaging and interesting, or our team's boring and we would love to have somebody more fun and engage, like whatever the thing is. The interview is about not just what can you do, but like, would we want to work with you? And what would it be like to work with you? So it is important to connect on things that aren't necessarily about what your accomplishments have been. And if there's an opportunity to reveal yourself and, you know, prompt interesting questions from them, then yes, you should go ahead and reveal yourself. And I mean, obviously be humble about it. It doesn't You don't have to start with that, but where you can maybe introduce it into the discussion and maybe have a joke ready. Maybe have something like maybe you can be self-deprecating, and and that's something that people really appreciate usually.
Yeah, that's so true. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be what I like to say, professionally authentic. It's like everyone's pushing authenticity, but
Hmm.
sometimes people can be too authentic, like talking very negatively about a previous job or a previous boss or something. It's like, no, 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 don't bring that into it, even though that is technically authentic. Bring that
Right.
professional authenticity into the room. And I'm curious, now that you've been moving through your career, I loved how you shared some of those early experiences of how you reached out to people, how you got feedback from people, and how your mentor, unofficial mentors helped you. Now that you're moving through your career and you've been on the other side, what has it looked like when people have reached out to you? What are some of the things that you've seen from people that maybe reported to you or have worked alongside you or have reached out to you for help? What sort of things do you see that you really applaud, or things that maybe people were not stepping quite they maybe stepped a little outside the bounds? What have you seen out there?
I really like it when someone has a very specific question and asks me that question as opposed to just being very broad, like, hey, I would just like to I would just love to chat with you. Like, hey, I'm thinking about this career change and I just want to chat with you. You have to be more specific, like what is it you're trying to do so that somebody could help you. And then also just be really clear what your goals are. I'm mentoring a couple of people at Microsoft right now, and one of the gals was just really clear in terms of what it was she wanted to achieve next, and really sincere in working with me to kind of identify the ways she could show her manager that she took his feedback and she was making progress on the items. And she was like, yeah, I feel like I've done these things, but I don't know if he knows. I was like, well, one way to do it is to say, hey, last time we spoke, you told me that you wanted me to work on this. And I've as a result, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. So it's not just enough sometimes to like do the thing. It's important to communicate that you heard somebody and you're doing the thing. And then they're like, I see, because people don't necessarily put two and two together. So it's the same, like being able to tell somebody like, these are the things I care about. And based on what you've been able to do, I feel like, is there something that advice that you would have for me in this area so I could achieve this? So that, being just really clear and also not being afraid to ask, because I have a motto. This is a great way, and I forget this every once in a while, to live life is if you don't ask, you don't get. There's all kinds of rules out there, and people put those rules in place because they don't want people to um, to go, to take advantage. But I don't think it's not taking advantage to ask and say, hey, I really would love this. Is it possible? And they'll be like, yeah, for you, sure. For everybody, no. Right. Think about asking for, and yeah, obviously in a very like sincere way, but make sure you're asking for what you want and being really sincere about it. And if you don't ask, you don't get. And frankly, if you don't ask, you're in the same position. But if you ask, they might say yes, and they might say no, in which case you haven't lost anything. And maybe they'll think about you later when they're like, oh yeah, this person asked me about this. So I think they could be interested in this role or whatnot. I just say part of building your community is not just asking, but also letting people know what you want. Right. So if you're looking for a new job or you want to transition to a new area, reach out to people that work in that area or reach out to people in your already existing network and say, I'm really interested in this. Do you know anybody that has experience in this area? Do you know anybody that works at this company? Put what you want out there in the world, because otherwise, if it's in your head, like it's going to be hard to, you can do it. You can do it on your own, but it's much easier to do it with the help of others.
I really like what you're saying here, because there is that idea that like when, if we don't ask, we don't get. And if we don't try, of course, we don't move forward. Right. And so, so often there's this mindset that folks have, which is everyone's already against me, so I'm just not gonna try. Right.
Oh,
Like
right. Yeah,
the
yeah.
world is against me, everyone's against me, I don't want to bother people. And I'm sure we could get into the psychology of it and where this all comes from, but just dealing with it in today, right? Something like sending out an email to someone. If you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't ask to meet for coffee, you're never going to meet anyone for coffee. If you don't ask for a job, you're never going to get the job. If you don't ask for the promotion or the if you don't negotiate the offer, you're never going to get that extra buck. And I think like there's got to be something that's training us in society or culture to not ask those questions, because it seems like everyone's afraid to do it. But what I think is so interesting is when we do ask, what you pointed out, that sincerity piece, right? Because I think sometimes people ask incorrectly, right? They hear, if you
All the
don't,
time.
exactly, if you don't ask, you don't get. So they go, I want this much money, or I want this thing, and they like come into aggressive, or they come into timid, or they come in whatever way. And what I think is so fun, especially around like negotiations, is I help people do it in a way that they're comfortable with, but is also effective, where they kind of bury the lead in an email of like asking a bunch of questions about the offer and then, finding a way to get an extra 5 or 10K. But the fear around even putting those questions out there, I think is so interesting. So I want to dig into the idea of sincerity a bit. Because I think people think it's insincere to want something from someone else at all, right? If
Mm.
I have any agenda at all, then I'm not being sincere, because for some reason they maybe equate sincerity with selflessness. I'm curious what your thoughts are around sincerity and how you might define it, or how you might describe it to someone who's trying to build that muscle.
I think sincerity also starts with thoughtfulness. Like, how can you show people that you are thoughtful? You can show that by being prepared. So you've done your research to understand about the person or about the company and what makes it unique. Because why should I invest in you if you're just like reaching out to everybody? Like, tell me you know something, show me you know something about me, show me you know something about my company, and show me that you know what you can contribute. Like, don't just come right with an open hand. So it's being thoughtful about the process. Um, if you're asking for somebody's time, people don't frankly have time to get coffee these days or lunch with people. They might have time to talk to you on their commute home or their commute to work. So how about you put that in? Like, I'm sure you're incredibly busy. Could we, maybe we could spend 10 minutes during your commute when you're in the car. That just right away tells people, oh, this person isn't just trying to waste my time. They're being really thoughtful about the ask. And nobody wants you ever to pick their brain. That's like the worst thing. I get that all the time. Can I pick your brain over lunch? Like, first of all, I can afford my own lunch. So I like want to make sure, like, if people don't know you, they don't know what your company's like. I don't know, I want to spend lunch with you, right? That's a long time, nor coffee. Well, how can you make it convenient for that person to help you, right? And tell them exactly what you're asking for instead of beating around the bush. Because I usually respond and say, can you tell me, what it is I can help you with? And then I get a more like specific answer back. But it would be nice if I just got that to start with. So just be really thoughtful about your ask and really thoughtful about the preparation that you put into it. I'm reaching out to you because of X, not like, hi, I saw your profile and I just am going to ask you for stuff, right? You have to earn your place it's almost, we had this saying when I was in doing kind of like when I was at my startup and there was like some sales and business development, you have to earn the right to pitch. And so you earn the right to pitch by doing your research, being sincere, putting out an ask where somebody would feel like, oh yeah, this time and investment in this person is worthwhile. So if you want an introduction to so-and-so, they would need to know, like, why should they introduce you to so-and-so? Is there something that so-and-so would like to learn about you? Is there something that connects you to the person you're trying to connect with? Make it relatable, make it relevant, and make sure that you're putting your best self out there, and put yourself in their shoes to think about like how when people ask me for help, like what is it that makes me want to help them, right? We can just turn those questions back on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think it turns people off because I think a lot of people listening to this who are in the job search, they might go, okay, so in my first message, I need to tell them that I want a job. I'm asking for a job. So I need to include the link to the job, and I need to include my resume, and I need to tell them that I want to work there, and I need to ask them to pass my resume to the right person. So like, when I'm just already hearing the wheels go down the wrong down the wrong road. I'm curious,
Sure.
like when you say make it compelling, what are your thoughts? Like what would that look like? Because if someone is just saying, like, I always make the comparison, like you wouldn't want your first message on Bumble or Tinder to be, I want to get married, right? So you wouldn't, you don't want your first message to a stranger to be, can you give me a job? But there's a lot of nuance in there. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
I mean, generally you want to keep it pretty short, if you can. It really depends on the context. I've sent an email to like a VP of business development, and it's been long. It's been like, hey, I saw that you raised money recently. I saw that you had a press release that said that you're starting to partner with these types of companies. My background is this, and this is where this is how I've helped other people, and this is where I think I can help you. Bam. So it was like long, right? It took me hours to put it together so that it was powerful. If you're not reaching out to the hiring manager, which I was doing, and I totally, like, again, how did I know this person's email? Resourcefulness. I just guessed on like 5-6 different types of emails that could be first name, last name at, last name at, like that did all the things. And so I sent an email at like 3 a.m. because I literally worked on it like until then. And I got a response back at 8 a.m. saying, wow, this is really interesting. Yeah, let's have a conversation. How about we have a call? And then I, went one step further, and I was like, well, I'll be in the neighborhood of where the office is. Can I just pop in and say hi and meet you in person for 30 minutes, just like I would over the phone? And he relented. And obviously being in person is much more powerful than being on the phone. So I would say your question is if it's somebody you don't have to pitch them all the way necessarily. You just say, hey, I'm really interested in this role. I'm wondering if you know somebody there, or I'm wondering if you'd be open to referring me, and here's some relevant experience that I have that I think would be helpful. Just something short, but you do want to tie in some relevance and provide some context. And then it's always nice to ask. So it's just like, is it okay? Would it be okay for me to share my resume with you? Or I'm going to leave my LinkedIn here. If you'd like my resume, please let me know. A lot of salespeople use the approach where they'll say, can I call you in 2 weeks? Or can I check back in with you? And so you can use some of those tactics where you ask for permission for folks to opt in. Can I reach back out to you in 2 weeks if I haven't heard back?
Yeah, that's huge. And it really is like, especially with the resume. No one wants to read your resume until they've asked you for it. So it's always good. It's always good to not lead with that. Right.
Yeah.
Lead with the
but
message.
LinkedIn is easy.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is easy, right? You like
and
here, yeah.
and put that in your signature. So if they're interested in
Exactly.
learning more, you don't even have to
They
say,
can.
here's my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So moving out of the tactics back into some of the larger topics here, I'm curious, in your career now, where you're at today, um, how do you sort of see the sense of belonging evolving for you over time? What has changed in your mindset of like how you belong, both at work and outside of work? Because I think sometimes we put too much pressure to have our work fulfill every part of our life, right? And so I'm curious, how have you sort of found belonging both in work, outside of work, and been able to explore different areas? Because I know you've got so many exciting things going on right now.
So I think like belonging depends on kind of where you are and what you want to do. I think at work now, I am trying to bring more people in uh, as a leader, right? I put uh, workshops together so that people who are younger, earlier in their career can thrive and have really thoughtful advice on how to do that at Microsoft. Outside of work, I've always actually been really interested in like politics and policy since I was, I guess, in high school. And I recently, a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to apply for a program, a leadership program that President Bush and President Clinton were spearheading along with H. President Bush's father and George Bush, as well as Lyndon B. Johnson's library. And I joined this group of 60 individuals who were selected for the program in a 6-month leadership program. And I got to meet the presidents, um, the first ladies, their cabinet members. We got to sit down and have dinner with them. I mean, it wasn't just like you meet and greet, like you just shake your hands, but they actually some of us get a chance to know them. So I got to know President Bush because I was seated with him at dinner. And I think I was one seat away from him. And he asked me, "What's your story?" And I told him, like, my first memory of coming to the US, my first memory in life is of being handed over to a pirate and living in a refugee camp for a year before coming to the US. And I'm so grateful to be here and to meet you. And he was just like, "What?"
That's a crazy story.
Are you talking about? And then he asked me more questions and we got to know each other. And then he invited me back to the Bush Center to speak to the participants in his next leadership program. So that was really nice. And I brought a book with me about like the refugee experience of an author that I really appreciated called The Best We Could Do. And it just kind of highlighted the Vietnamese kind of refugee experience. And I put a picture of my family inside so he can kind of see like what our experience looked like when we came over. He wasn't there. I gave it to his staff. And I got a letter, a few months later, and it was like, "Tina, thank you for this book. I really appreciate it. Laura and I can't wait to read it. And I heard you did a really good job that day on, on the leadership panel, and just like the nicest you could even imagine, right?" And so it comes from gestures, from you putting a gesture out, somebody kind of accepting your gesture, and then he has decided that he wanted to paint. He's a painter now, so he painted his first book on world leaders, second book on our wounded warriors. And the third book is on immigrants and refugees who have contributed to America. And he chose me to be in the book. So the president painted a portrait of me.
It's incredible.
The book launch was yesterday, and I went to Dallas this weekend to be a part of the book launch and to be on stage with him and to tell my story and share kind of how beautiful it is to be able to come here, to have people help pull me up alongside them, to feel a sense of belonging. I feel like a lot of times immigrants don't feel like they belong here. Like they don't have a sense of the feeling like an American necessarily. And luckily I came here when I was quite young and I felt like an American. I wanted to be an American. I was all in, like I really wanted to assimilate and be American. And whenever somebody kind of told me, whenever I got the sense that somebody felt like I didn't belong, I just ignored them, or I told them to, go away. And I would just make sure that I felt like I had a place at the table like everyone else. And I think it's really important. Self-confidence is everything, right? Obviously you have to have talent, you have to be thoughtful, but if you lack self-confidence, then all those other things are really hard to get, right? Like self-confidence is kind of like step one. And to build that self-confidence, it's important to feel like you belong to a community or a group, and that, you're willing to help one another out. So yeah, it's been really cool to be a part of the book and share kind of my story in terms of how others have been able to help me, how immigrants contribute to the greatness of America, how we should all help one another. And at Facebook, we actually have had a ton of like small groups that use the Facebook groups to connect, right? At Microsoft, we have this really cool first generation low income sort of ERG, employee resource group, where we get together to help immigrants who don't have parents that have been in the professional world, like help them thrive at Microsoft, because they don't know like the things that they don't know, right? So like, for example, I think one of the gals that I work with, her first instinct was like to book the cheapest hotel possible when she was traveling, because she didn't want to put Microsoft out. So she ended up in some like flea bag motel, and
Oh
her,
my goodness.
colleagues were like, this is not necessary. Like, we have a list of hotels and you don't have to get the cheapest one. So it's just kind of like, and then knowing how to be in the workplace, how to work with your colleagues, how to ask for what you need, how to manage up any of the things. Like, imagine you don't have any advice from your parents, you don't have a network, you don't know professionals necessarily. This might be your first job, but because you don't have the guidance from folks around you, it's really that important to build community. So build community for yourself and build community for the others around you, and help one another. So that, I think that's where, belonging, self-confidence, sharing your story, it all kind of comes together when you can harness not just what's in your heart and what you're capable of, but harness the sense of community and the sense of tribe to help everyone. It's not, again, like, as people help you, you want to be able to help others, and that it's kind of goes full circle.
I love that. Yeah, it's that building that sense of self within yourself, then finding those places where you can be yourself in a larger community, and then taking it to the next level like you did, and helping other people find themselves and starting the cycle all the way over again. So I really love that. And as we get to the end of the podcast here, I'm curious if there was some advice that you would want to share with someone who's maybe having a tough time finding belonging in their career and finding a place that feels right in their work, what would you say to them?
I would ask them to think about like what's important to them, like what are understanding your core values and what you care about will really help you convey and find your community, right? So um, and building up little things that will give you more confidence and a better sense of belonging. Like, that is all tied together. So reaching out to one person, find the baby steps that you can, friendly person, ask their advice, talk to another person, follow up on what you're learning, send thank you notes, make the do the hard work to make the connections and to show your appreciation for folks. And being in a place of gratitude where you're not focused on like, oh, here's what I don't have and here are the things I lack, but rather focusing on what you do have, that will be the best place that you can start from. And it'll kind of change the energy, right? Because when you talk to people and you're coming from a place of gratitude versus from a place of fear or lacking, it really comes across. And so I would say just really think about what you can do to harness what makes you feel good and get to that place where you can convey that and you can make baby steps to reaching your goals.
Tina, thank you so much. If folks want to follow along with what you're doing in the world, where can they find you?
On Instagram, I'm mean pea. So, there's that saying that sweet pea. I was like, that's just not so saccharine. So I'm mean pea on Instagram. And on LinkedIn, you just find me as if you just did Tina Tran in Microsoft, you'll find me quite easily. Those are the two places. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I really appreciate your support of what we're building here at Career Therapy as we continue to try and explore the hidden side of modern work and tell some of the stories that maybe don't get enough light shed on them. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, I hope you will leave us a review on iTunes. Subscribe to this wherever you're listening or watching on YouTube, Spotify, etc. And share this with some friends who you know are going through similar experiences and looking to build their career and gain some insights along the way. Again, thank you so much for stopping by, and I wish you the best. I'll see you on the next episode.